Hello, I'm Andy Agafangelo, the founder of Transparency Task Force, a certified social enterprise dedicated to speaking up for consumers. We believe that consumers ought to have a financial sector to deal with that is transparent, truthful, and trusty, where they get good value for money, where risks are properly declared, and where they have the benefit of a civilized regulatory framework that functions as it's meant to when things do go wrong. The phrase when things do go wrong is quite apt because unfortunately things do go wrong rather more than they should. We're here today talking about the open letter that Transparency Task Force sent to the Treasury Committee on the 16th of July. In that open letter, we made direct reference to Violation Tracker UK, a wonderful database that brings together hard evidence about infringements in all kinds of industries, including financial services. We have Maya with us today. Maya will no doubt be telling you all a little bit more about Violation Tracker later. So the harsh reality is, folks, that the financial sector is predisposed to misbehave. It accounts for around 8% of UK GDP. It is a massive industry. And it's an industry that, of course, has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we routinely spend absolute fortune on the hierarchy of oversight, the regulatory framework, whether that's through our taxes or costs and charges that are used to pay the levy that the industry pays the financial sector. So we're paying good money. We, the people, are in effect paying good money for a regulatory framework that is designed to provide an appropriate degree of consumer. But as the Violation Tracker UK data shows, it does go wrong rather a lot. Unfortunately, it's been going wrong rather a lot with the existing protections that we have. And as I'm sure many of you will be aware, last week there were some very significant developments in relation to the consumer protection regime. Many people would argue, including of course me, that consumer protections are being eroded, they're being undermined, they're being rolled back. And when we wonder why that might be happening, we don't really have to look too far. The UK government has made it very clear that it sees regulation as red tape and bureaucracy. And whilst, of course, it says it won't be doing anything to reduce or weaken consumer protections, the harsh reality is that it is very difficult to see how consumer protections are not being undermined during this period of rampant deregulation that we seem to be going through. Rampant deregulation is not just a phenomena associated with the UK, it's happening in other parts of the world. And in some ways, that's a key point, because if the thinking of the UK government is, let's lighten the regulatory burden in the UK so that we attract more business from overseas, business that we want to help our UK economy, what is there to stop other countries doing precisely the same thing? In fact, not only what is there anything stopping other countries doing it, they are doing it. Later on, I'll put a link in the chat to Trump Tracker. Trump Tracker looks at the regulatory unravelings happening on the other side of the Atlantic. It is very, very easy to see, folks, how what we've actually got underway right now is a race to the bottom. And not only is there this huge question mark about the overriding wisdom of deregulating, we also have to think about whether there's actually any real logic in the idea that if British consumers are encouraged to put money out of banks and building parties and into stocks and shares, that is somehow going to stimulate growth. One of the things we make a point about in the open letter we issued today to the Treasury Committee We issued it in response to the Money Box programme that was aired on Saturday, a programme you're all going to be listening to, hopefully again. Hopefully you've already listened to it. You'll be listening to it very shortly. It's only 12 minutes and it makes a lot of sense playing it. One of the points we make in the open letter we issue today is this. If people have money in the bank or building society, that money is available by British banks and building societies to give out through loans. But if people move money from banks and building societies into stocks and shares, the entity they are buying the stocks and shares from or through may or may not be based in the UK. The money that is used to buy those assets may or may not end up in the UK. So there's a fundamental question about whether, in reality, moving money into stocks and shares from deposits actually does result in more money being available to invest in the real economy. Is it conceivable, ladies and gentlemen, the HM Treasury and the government's strategy to stimulate growth by getting more money into stocks and shares is in some way flawed? I'm sure we'll be coming back to that point in a little while. But what I'm going to do now is share my screen and play the entire program from beginning to end. It's about 12 and a bit minutes. Please do listen attentively, even if you've listened to it before, because the questions of the day are: is there evidence of any attempts to dodge the questions being put to Charlotte Clark? Is there any evidence of attempts to deflect from the questions? Is there any evidence of attempts to deceive, be that consciously or otherwise? If there is evidence that there is deception going on, consciously or otherwise, what might be the motivation behind it? And is there actually misinformation? So we're all going to listen to it together. Time to make a cup of tea if you want to. Feel free to turn your camera off while we're playing this piece. We'll get it played in just a second. I'll spool it up now. And after that, I'll say a few more words before then passing on to Sunil Chadha from Deception Detection Lab Limited, who played an enormous part in the work we've done over the last few days at TTF. I'll come back to that later. While the session is playing, I will also be putting into the chat things that you may well want to take a look at whilst listening to the program. So you're going to be kept quite busy. But the most important thing is please listen very, very attentively. That's the key word. Please listen attentively. Okay, so I'm about to now go to the program and I'm going to press play after I've done that. Bear with me. I think I can do it while sharing the screen.
Hello, welcome to this Moneybox podcast. Inflation rises to its highest since January 2024, and then it was falling. And charities that care for people at the end of their lives have told this programme that people given less than 12 months to live should be excused from paying council tax. But first, it was a momentous day on Tuesday. The government and regulators announced major changes in the way investments will be sold and consumers protected. It culminated with the Chancellor's Mansion House speech to bankers and business leaders in the City of London.
For too long, we have presented investment in too negative a light, quick to warn people of the risks without giving proper weight to the benefits. And our tangled system of financial advice and guidance has meant people cannot get the right support to make the right decisions for themselves.
Earlier in the day, the Treasury and the regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, announced consultations on plans to introduce what the Chancellor called the most significant reforms to the Financial Ombudsman Service ever. The Ombudsman protects consumers, of course, when things go wrong and can order compensation to be paid, but the Ombudsman itself announced it would cut the interest paid on any compensation payments. Investment companies and banks have welcomed the reforms, but some consumer organisations are much less happy. One consumer advocacy group warned that the reforms were the most significant rollback of post-global financial crisis protections ever. But it's clear there will be major changes in the way investing is promoted and regulated. So how do people feel about investing now? Our reporter Jo Krasner spoke to people in Liverpool.
Would you invest in the stock market?
No, I don't know enough about it. My brother once tried it and he lost his money, so I'm a bit weary now. And I wouldn't know what was a scammer these days.
Yes, but as long as you're sensible and you understand the level of risk you take, then that's life. There's risk with everything.
I would invest in the stock market and do invest in the stock market in a very limited way and independently. A company that I use an app, dead easy to use, can monitor things minute by minute, day by day, buy, sell, do what you want. But as I say, it's a limited proposition. The bulk of any savings that myself, my wife have are actually in ISAs or in premium bonds and other financial products that are a little bit more secure.
I have done over the years ago.
And what was the return like?
Well, I got caught out during the tech boom and the return was good then, but you get wrapped up in it and then it drops and you lose your money.
So what about now? Would you invest now in the stock market?
Well, no. I don't have the money to lose and I don't have the time to sit on it for long enough, for a long term.
So would you invest in stocks and shares?
No, because my father told me never to put money into anything risky.
I know it's very good for some people, but for me, the average Joe, I haven't got a clue what it's all about.
At the heart of the changes announced this week will be the Financial Conduct Authority, which of course regulates how financial firms behave and treat their customers. Charlotte Clark is its Director of Consumers and Competition. I asked her how these reforms will help people to invest.
I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it, in terms of the range of reasons and rationales that people had. I think the reforms that we're taking forward at the moment are really about just kind of giving people more choice and giving them more support. What we have found, and I guess it was true of some of the people in your clips, is some people don't do it because they don't know how to. Some people feel overwhelmed by it, by the choices that are available, and some people just want more support. One of the things that we have found, and is increasingly true, is that people are turning to things like social media to try and get that support, which is probably less than ideal. So one of the policies that we're taking forward at the moment, targeted support, is very much asking, people within financial services to step into that gap and to provide people with more support so that they can make the right decisions for themselves.
Well, let me ask you then about targeted support. I mean, we looked at this a few weeks ago on Moneybox. It's now due to begin in April. But as I understand it, that means that a bank or a firm could just promote its own products, which may be expensive. They may be poor value for money. I mean, that's not advice, is it? It's sales.
Oh, I mean, the design of targeted support very much has consumers and consumer protection at the heart of it. So in terms of an overriding principle that whoever is talking to that individual, has to ensure that their financial well-being is improved by the intervention. So, in terms of the options that are available with regards to targeted support, that sense that it's about ensuring that somebody understands the products and the options that are available to them, that they can kind of make the right decisions for themselves.
But let me ask you specifically, if my bank gives me targeted support, will that involve it recommending I go to another bank with my investments, or I go to another firm, or even go put my money in cash? What will it be doing that is anything other than just saying, we've got these great products that might be better for you?
In targeted support, there are a couple of options within it. So with regards to a suggestion of a particular product or course of action, that is not necessarily, it's not like normal financial advice where you're taking into account somebody's specific circumstances. What they are doing is they're designing for people like you. What are the common characteristics of consumers like you, and what do people normally do? So I don't think you should think of it as, right, well, we're just trying to sell you our latest product. It is an assessment of what consumers in your situation and with your characteristics would benefit from.
So there'll be no sales in it. There'll be no sales. It won't say, we think you should put your money, your pension into a SIP, but they won't say, and we offer a very good SIP. They will just mention SIPs and say there are loads of providers out there.
So in terms of how it will work, I mean, the responsibilities on the firm are very clear in terms of that they have to ensure that the consumer is meeting their needs. This is not about kind of trying to kind of increase their sales, but more around this kind of general understanding that there are a number of people who simply are not having their financial needs met, and increasingly that advice is coming from unregulated sources such as influencers and other social media kind of outlets, rather than actually people who have responsibilities and accountabilities within financial services.
And to go back to investments, which is a lot of this is about encouraging investment. The Chancellor wants people to invest and support the UK economy and so on. Is that a good thing to be promoting? You know, you can get a guaranteed return over 4% for the next 5 years on your cash. What evidence is there that your investments will do better than that over the next 5 years?
Well, I mean, you can never look to the future and say you will definitely get a better return. But I guess if you look backwards, if you held an asset in cash, you know, within a savings account over the last 15 years compared to investing in stocks and shares, ISAs, then you would have done substantially worse. And I think it's about trying to ensure that people understand the risks. I think one of the clips said nothing is without risk. Holding a product in cash, you have the inflation risk. There are
That's not a
other
risk, is
risks.
it? That's a certainty. We know about inflation, and inflation will affect investments exactly the same as it affects cash. It's not a risk.
No, but if you are holding a set amount of money, the value of that money will dwindle, and you
Well,
have
not at
to
the moment.
understand that.
Not at the moment. You can get 4.25% and inflation's 3.6.
If you're in a 4.25% savings account, then yes, you know, you will manage to keep the value of your money, but what you won't be doing is having significant returns on top of that.
No, but you won't in some investments, will you? I mean, this is the point about investments. There is a risk, and risk cannot mean reward, or it wouldn't be a risk, would it? It can mean you can get more, or you might get less.
No, that is definitely true. You know, where things have low risks, you end up generally with lower returns. Where things are higher risk, they are higher returns. But as you say,
Well,
that
they're higher
comes
returns
with.
if they work, but if they don't work, they're losses, aren't they? That's what risk means.
But I think there's a difference, isn't there? There's a difference between volatility and risk. So, you know, if you look at something like stocks and shares, yes, they go up and down. There was one of your other Vox boxes talked about investing in tech. And I'm assuming they probably invested in tech in the early 2000s and lost money when that bubble burst. If they were still invested in that tech, my guess is they would be pretty well off by now in terms of what has happened to the shares within that sector. So there is a big difference between volatility and risk. And in terms of consumers, them understanding what is the right thing. If you're investing for the long term and you are choosing a relatively low risk product, something like a pension, you will end up with a lower pension than if you have a more balanced portfolio that involves things like equities or private markets, which will attract higher returns over the long period.
You know, if you get this wrong, though, the promoting investments, changing the role of the Financial Ombudsman Service, if you get it wrong, it's consumers who'll suffer, isn't it? Businesses are being protected at the expense of consumers, and yet your statutory duty begins with your objective A, the consumer protection objective. Are you losing sight of that in promoting business, promoting investment, promoting, you know, the Chancellor's agenda of growth at the expense of consumers?
No, I mean, consumer protection is still very central, I think, to the FCA
But is it
and the
top?
work that we're doing. It's a primary objective, you know, growth is a secondary objective. At the moment, you know, politically, clearly growth is the big issue within the UK economy. And it's important that regulators lean into that as an issue and do what they feel is right to be able to kind of support the growth agenda. Because ultimately, you know, growth is living standards. So it's not as if it's not as if we're just trying to support firms. Ultimately, growth is about living standards for the average person, you know, which matters immensely.
The Transparency Task Force, though, it's a social enterprise that's focused on finance reform and protecting consumers. It wrote an open letter this week to the Treasury Select Committee, and it said, taken together, these changes, that's all the things that were announced on Tuesday, are, quote, the most significant rollback of post-global financial crisis protections ever. Why is now the time to change these protections?
Well, I mean, I don't agree with, I was going to say Andy, the task force. Yeah, I don't agree with his assessment of these changes. I think that these are very proportionate, kind of thoughtful changes. Why is this the right time? I mean, the economy is struggling with growth. We need to make sure that we are doing the right things to be able to generate it. And if there are things that we are doing which are stopping firms from being more productive, being able to invest, being able to support other parts of the economy, then we need to look at that.
But not at the expense of consumers.
Definitely not.
Charlotte Clark from the Financial Conduct Authority talking to me yesterday. The Treasury told us that it's what it calls rebalancing its approach to risk to support economic growth, which is its number one mission, while it says, quote, retaining vital consumer protections.
Okay. Okay. Before I forget to do it, I'm going to put a link to the recording you just listened to in the chat. I'll be putting a few other links into the chat in a moment as well. So the first one there is the recording we just heard. Please do listen to it. I've listened to it several times, and to be honest with you, every time I listen to it, I find yet another thing that doesn't quite sit right with me. Ladies and gentlemen, before we do anything else, I'd like us to do what I actually think is quite important. Many of you know that the Transparency Task Force has a strategy for driving change, which is about bringing together the thinking of those with a sense of passion and purpose for the change we want to see, with those who have the power, the position, and the predisposition to make that change possible. And there's absolutely no doubt about it, ladies and gentlemen, that journalists, media professionals like Paul Lewis and his colleague Dan Whitworth at Moneybox play a phenomenally important part in the work that we're trying to do. We simply can't get stuff looked at or listened to or watched or studied or written about without people like Paul Lewis and his team doing the work that they do. And frankly, there are many media professionals who don't write about the stuff we'd like them to write about and don't broadcast things that we'd like them to broadcast. So when we have people who do that, we should honour that and we should acknowledge that. Before we do anything else, can we please show our appreciation to BBC and Moneybox for that piece on Saturday covering the Mansion House reforms as they did? I'm very grateful that they did it, and let's hope that kind of coverage continues. I'll be passing over to Sunil Chadha in a moment. Sunil will introduce himself properly when he starts talking. But before we do that, I'm going to share my screen once again, and I'm going to show you the email that I sent this morning to the Treasury Committee, because again, I'd like to stress a few particularly important points. So I hope you're now looking at my screen. You can see emails there. The emails you can see are all public domain emails. If you want to know who's in the Treasury Committee, just Google Treasury Select Committee members and you'll find who they are. And you can follow some very obvious links to find their email addresses if ever you wanted to do so. I'm simply making this point because the emails you can see on the screen are all public domain emails. I'm going to read it out because the writing's a bit small, and I'm going to pause in a couple of places just to really emphasise particular things. Dear Dame Meg Healer MP and your Treasury Select Committee colleagues, I hope you're well. I'm following up on my 16th July email and open letter to you, which is below, with regard to a new open letter that I'm sending you today. The new open letter is about the concerns we have following the statements made by Charlotte Clark, the FCA's Director of Consumers and Competition, that ought to be of interest to the committee. They certainly are of interest to me and others. The statements were made during an interview on BBC Radio 4's Moneybox programme that was broadcast on Saturday, 19th July. The presenter was the acclaimed broadcaster Paul Lewis. Please listen to the first 12 minutes of the programme, which is available for you here, link, and ask yourself if you believe there are any signs of attempts to not directly answer questions, deflect, deceive, or even make statements that are factually incorrect. For the avoidance of any doubt, I am not in any way critical of the BBC, BBC Radio 4 Moneybox, or Paul Lewis, or any of his colleagues. In fact, I thought the covering of the Mansion House speech and related reforms was first class, in keeping with the standards we have come to expect from that programme. Furthermore, and this is a very, very important point, ladies and gentlemen, a very, very important point. Furthermore, it must be understood that the commentary about what Charlotte Clark has said and the way she has said it are not in any way aimed at her personally. I have known Charlotte for several years, from when she was in charge of pensions at the DWP, and I know her to be a phenomenally capable person. She is clearly doing her new job at the FCA as best as she can, and she is very capable of doing it well. But the issue is whether she, or indeed anybody at the FCA, should be allowing themselves to be used as a cheerleader for the city. Many believe there is a fundamental conflict of interest between being a regulator and being a cheerleader. It's such an obvious conflict of interest that, in my opinion, anybody that cannot see that conflict of interest may be guilty of the kind of willful blindness that can arise through groupthink. A PDF of the new open letter is attached, and it's also available through this link. Once again, developments are making us have to ask you and your committee to act through providing the proper parliamentary scrutiny, accountability, and the challenge that is desperately needed to create the fair and effective financial regulation that we all want. Please note that, as well as my colleagues Alexander and Chelsea, I've CC'd Sunil Chadha and Chris Woodruff, who kindly produced the report by Deception Detection Lab Limited that my open letter refers to, at no cost whatsoever. Thank you very much, Sunil and Chris, for doing that. Your work in helping to get to the truth is hugely appreciated and, sadly, much needed. Dear Dame Meg Hillier MP and your Treasury Select Committee colleagues, I do hope our open letter is helpful and that you let us have your thoughts on whether or not your committee will act soon. With our utmost respect to you all, Andy, etc., etc. This really is not about Charlotte Clark personally, at all whatsoever. It's about the dynamics that are at work within our regulatory framework, the influences being put upon it, perhaps the pressure is being put upon it, that we all might come to regret big time in years to come. Sunil Chadha has been a TTF ambassador from pretty much day one. Sunil's also a member of the APPG on Investment Fraud and Fairer Financial Services Select Committee that I chair. He's a great advocate for consumer reform. Fortunately for me, as well as Sunil being a remarkably good financial services professional who knows how to investigate malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, mis-selling, and all that kind of thing, he's also a director at Deception Detection Lab Limited, which, as I'm sure Sunil will go on to tell you, specialises in investigators, journalists, and others helping to understand if or when people are exhibiting evidence of deception, be it deliberate or otherwise. Sunil and his team worked hard over the weekend and even harder yesterday in putting the report together. It's a report that no doubt would have cost a significant amount of money had we had to pay for it. They kindly gave that report to the TTF at no cost whatsoever. Before Sunil starts speaking, can we please show our appreciation, not just to Sunil, but also his colleague Chris and all the team at Deception Detection Lab Limited. Sunil, over to you, please. I think you've got about 20 minutes or so. So take your time and help us understand how you see this issue. Thank you very much, Sunil. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Lovely. Andy, firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to look at Moneybox, and thank you for having me on speaking tonight. And thank you to you all for attending today to listen to what we have to say. I'd like to say that firstly, Deception Detection Lab it's aligned with the TTF in that truth and facts produce the best outcomes. And unfortunately, the UK seems to be veering away from that at the moment. Just a little bit about myself, 40 years experience in financial services, And all the way through my career, I've noted the little anomalies that always seem to favour the fund manager rather than the investor. If you add up the quantum of those anomalies, and then look at monetary amounts and costs and charges and risks, the industry is completely asymmetric. It has an asymmetric relationship with its investors and its customers. And I liken it to standing on top of a very tall mountain, looking down on a city or village, and everything is just minuscule. That is the advantage. And if I look at where things are going now with the Mansion House reforms, it's completely unacceptable. It really is. It's affecting the allocation of efficient capital around the economy. And it's nonsense. So I've got 40 years experience in financial services. I've consulted all over the world with hedge funds, custodians, fund managers, fund of hedge funds, you name it, I seem to have done it. Um, and in my last job, I spotted wrongdoing. I was a director, and I would scan the newspapers, etc., for financial services wrongdoing. I would articulate it, and this is from a factual perspective. I would articulate it, take it along to a blue chip law firm for review. If they liked it, it would go to a KC. However, one particular example, one case, I got stuck, and we had an earnings call from a company. It's a utility in the UK, and they were breaking, we thought, the royalty rules. So what I did was I had Chris Woodruff, who can't be here today. He's worked all weekend. His son's at finishing primary school this week, so he's got important events he can't miss. So Chris very kindly looked at it. As I said, I was running out of time. I had too many doors to open and investigate. They looked at the earnings call, and there it was, highly profitable division they didn't want to talk about, right? And that is where the loyalty profits were parked. So bingo. So the linguistics, and this is what the CEO, the CFO had to say on an earnings call, pointed to a door. I opened the door and factually investigated it. So that's how it's helped me. It's helped me a number of times. So what we do is factual timelines. So there's people out there, say the Woodford investors, that know all of the detail, when it happened, how it happened, who said what. We do the linguistics. We'll have a look at a disclosure. And I don't mind saying we did the Woodford compensation letter. We had a good look at it for the TTF. The FCA said up to, I think, 77 pence in the pound compensation. We said it's unlikely and there's no commitment to it. And those Woodford investors have had 7 pence. So that's kind of, the culture at the moment within our regulator. I just would like to say that Andy has mentioned my conflicts of interest. Obviously, I'm a TTF ambassador. I'm a secretariat member of the APPG on investment fraud and fairer FS. They're unpaid, but I'd just like to say our methodology within DDL is we look at language, words only. So when we come to analyze words, whether it's a radio program, we do not necessarily research it at all. We just listen to the words. Our words are the client, if you like, our client. Every statement that comes into us for analysis, we assume to be true. And from it, we can pick out the anomalies. There's 700 markers we look for. It's an FBI, the FBI who invented it, US law enforcement, and they design it to get to the truth. So we pick out sensitivities, potential deception, changes in language, all kinds of different things. And there was a lot of it in the Money Box radio program. If I may, I'll just talk about very quickly about DDL and what we do. So we have a training arm that provides training to US law enforcement agents, psychologists, and these are the big US agencies, law agencies. And very recently, we've looked at a number of cold murder cases. Nanette Quentel, I don't mind mentioning, in the US. There's an Irish farmer that was found chopped up in his own slurry pit. We have analysed witness statements and other statements in our training, and we have found stuff. We have then written it up and reported it to the police, and we now have two families on board, highly in distress. We're working pro bono with them to get to justice. All right. So the detectives in the US have missed lots of stuff, but if you look at the witness statements and their words, they're unusual, they're all over the place. That's the person you need to talk to first. All right. So this is the type of stuff that we do and how it works. Deception Detection Lab started in February of this year. We blog a few times a week. We get 2,500 minimum, probably LinkedIn views on our blogs. So that's the first side of it, if you like, to the trading business. And what we're doing is we're taking US and law enforcement methodologies into finance and law. And golly, we've seen some really rather unsavory things. We blog every week on true crime, and we've exposed a few. We think we found a few anomalies in some of the crimes on my LinkedIn profile and on our website. True crime, sport, corporates, and finance, politics, and lifestyle. And in fact, a couple of months ago, we were warned off writing damaging blogs on the Labour Party and it's a cabinet. There's two blogs out there on Lord Mandelson and Angela Rayner that you probably need to read, simply because it's 500 words and you'll see how we can pick out the lies. And they are lies, I'm afraid. Every week we blog, and every week the most opportunities we get to blog come from politics. And it's just so boring, right? They're not telling us the truth. So, and we can pick it and we can ask them questions into those sensitivities, etc., that highlight the fact that they are telling us a load of lies, or are misleading, right? So the type of projects we've been doing, we did a big expose on PwC, which went in front of the Australian Senate last year. That didn't work very well for PwC. We've done some predator capital stuff. We are currently pitching for coercive control, and this is personal coercive control and corporate coercive control. We're examining 900 pages of social media messages between two parties, and we can pick the language and we can pick the issues, and we can actually say whether we think this person has been involved in coercive control or not. We're also looking at a constructive dismissal case, and that's based again on words. He said, she said. Next week, I don't know if any of you have seen the Netflix Tinder swindler. There's a lady on there who exposed the Tinder swindler, and she's going to be writing a number of very open blogs on her experience. So that's something we're looking to do, is help her and trap the romance fraudsters. We've done a lot on earnings calls. These are companies who once a quarter will produce an earnings statement, carefully crafted, 30 pages. Then the minute the executives start talking on the earnings call, what they say comes apart from the carefully prepared earnings statement. And in the Q&A, if you ask the right question, it comes even further apart. And we can pick the anomalies across the three. We can target questions into them, and it might be, you'll find with executives, they won't talk the share price down because their remuneration is linked to it. So it's quite easy to do in some respects, spotting the anomalies. Anonymous and threat letters. We've launched a service for certain communities, and we can grade a threat level, and we can also profile the individual based on the words used. Excuse me just a sec, I'm just going to turn my page over. Something else we've done, we have examined loads and loads of FCA letters in the last few weeks, and I include the Woodford compensation letter in there. I'll include the money box side of it in this too. And what we find is the FCA is sending letters out to claimant pools and those representing them, and we think the letters are ambiguous and misleading. So for a number of TTF investigators, we have analysed those letters, and because we work with the people that know the factual timeline in detail, so our linguistics match. What we've found is, how can I put it? Misleading and ambiguous deliberately. So by analysing the letters, we've seen what we think, along with our customer, the strategy that the FCA is using. and the investigators have seen the strategy and have changed their strategy accordingly at the right time to disrupt it. Right, and that might be a court hearing, that might be something, but that is unfortunately quite common for us. We're seeing quite a few patterns related to deception, and we think it's very possibly deliberate. So, with respect to the Money Box radio program, I have to say, and I will say this up front, we feel some empathy for Charlotte Clark, simply because we think it's a hospital pass. How can you go on a radio show trying to defend an incoherent policy? Right, so that is where the problem is. The problem is up above Charlotte Clark. And really, if you look at it, the government is acting against the people that put it in power. Because where's the growth coming from? Right? Jobs are disappearing, unemployment's rising, inflation is rising, confidence is dropping. You cannot force retail consumers to pump their money into very possibly a crashing market. We've had 14 years of QE with no crash. You cannot force retail investors into high fee related or higher fee related products in order to drive growth, because it's just not going to happen. And to be honest with you, from my factual perspective of spotting wrongdoing, it's too asymmetric. I personally have de-risked. I've got the odd active fund, I've got passive funds, I've got commodities, but that is about it. And I'm afraid bearing in mind my SIP has gone into administration, I do not trust financial services, and I do not trust the regulator or the Treasury that sits above it. They're faceless and anonymous, and you can't see what's happening. So really, Charlotte Clark isn't the issue, it's what's going on above her. And I think as you walk through, as you listen to that program, you probably heard her stumble many times. The, right? This is all a sign of what we call cognitive load. She's been asked a question on the spot like that, and she has to come up with an answer. And you can tell what she really thinks and believes is probably quite honest and fair, but what she's been put in to say is something else. And she can't reconcile that within her own mind within a fraction of a second. We can see that. That's anomalies, classic signs of potential deception. All right. And if you match what we've said with some of the factual anomalies, and I think Charlotte says at the beginning of the interview, investors are confused with too much choice. And at the end, she says all of this will give them more choice. Right. So you can see none of it really adds up factually or from a linguistics perspective. And, there's just so many areas. Our report, we had to leave some things out because it would have, it's far more detailed, far more complex. And maybe some of you, I'll be honest with you, the man in the street wouldn't answer, wouldn't be able to respond or understand, what's happened. So as I said, we feel lots of empathy with her because she's been put into bat on a wicket, quite frankly, that is unacceptable. And really, the questions sit above Charlotte Clark with the FCA, I believe, and with the Treasury. And as I said, they're faceless and they're pulling the strings at the FCA. Furthermore, any FCA executive pushed into that money box program to do an interview would have stumbled in much the same manner as she did, just like you and I would, because we believe something to be right. When you're sent in to go and say something else, you cannot reconcile it, especially when you're asked a question on it. There's cognitive overload, and it takes a few seconds via there's or I's or whatever else to delay to try and think that through in your head and say it. So you and I would have done the same thing, I'll be brutally honest. But maybe you and I wouldn't have accepted something like that to go in and maybe say something that maybe wasn't true, was possibly deceptive, and maybe was against your core beliefs. We all would have done it. The way I look at things with the report is that obviously the way things stand at the moment, the FCA has a regulatory bar. As far as I can see, the monitoring and enforcement and action sits way below that bar. Now we're going to have a new bar, which is even lower. And from what I can see from it and the language, we can't tell where that bar sits. And then below the regulatory bar is actually where the FCA takes action. That's going to be even further down. We can't bottom from the linguistics where that bar sits. So, because it's all over the place. A further point, if I may, if you look at Charlotte's job title, it's FCA Director of Consumers and Competition. If you look at that word competition, it's been redefined, right? And they haven't been honest with anybody about that. Competition means the competition mandate for firms, which the government has given it. How can you have a role that covers consumers and the firm's competition mandate? That role is a complete and utter conflict of interest, right? And which is another reason why Charlotte has struggled to coherently respond to some of the questions. So really, as I said, the issues lie above. They really do. And these are people we are paying to look after us who are openly, I say openly with Charlotte, up above them, they are deceptive, right? They are deceptive. And I think we have a government that is making decisions, just like the last government and every other government. They're making decisions on a 4 to 5 year election cycle that do not match the time scale of our investments. Pensions, savings, right? It just doesn't match. So really, for me, as an investor, and I'm in decumulation now, so I'm semi-retired, if you like. I'm CEO of Deception Detection Lab. I am not putting my money into the stock market under any circumstances. I use cash ISAs to supplement my income, and I don't want them removed. I don't want to be placed in a stocks and shares ISA where I have to try and buy assets that match my investment aim, because it isn't going to work. Because whether you choose volatility, right, and that's Charlotte's words, that's outrageous, or risk, I cannot afford to see a drop in my capital that is generating my income. Right, sorry, but we cannot remove investors' choices because investors invest for different reasons, right? And whether it's a car in 2 years, a rent or house deposit in 3, I'm sorry, you just can't do that. I need certainty, you need certainty around that. And putting it in the stock market is not that certainty that we require to achieve our investment aim. In terms of the actual report, I would say there's so many areas. There were factual queries for one, and if you look at the linguistics, they match. The factual inaccuracies match the linguistics because you start stumbling and eyeing and weeing and whatever else. There's a lack of commitment to everything that she said. I don't believe Charlotte believes that this is a proper policy and that it's suitable for retail investors. Furthermore, we think there's some misleading statements. Volatility and risk is poor. It really is. That's such a poor comparison for me. There's use of bureaucratic jargon in some of her responses, and she's forgotten her target audience, which is the man in the street, the investor, the retail investor, unsophisticated, never going to understand what she said, parts of what she said in that interview. Many answers to questions are long, and if you look at them, we're trained to look at them. She hasn't answered the question. All right, so there's lots of obfuscation and all the rest of it. Hasn't answered the question. It might be a minute or a minute of her talking. She hasn't answered the question, and and as I said, the last thing I was going to say was the choices. The problem at the beginning was investors having too much choice, and at the end, she says it's going to give them more choice. Right, so the linguistics match the factual timelines. And if there's anything in that report, it's quite complicated. We're the only company in the United Kingdom doing what we're doing. We use linguistics, forensic statement and linguistic analysis. There are other types of FBI analysis, if I may, behavioral analysis, where you'll find an FBI agent in the room with you, looking at you, twitch your eyebrows, blink, move your hands, shuffle your feet, all that type of stuff. So we've got behavioral, we've got sentiment analysis, which some companies run on earnings calls. They can check the sentiment between the CEO and CFO, and that's done from a system. We don't use systems at DDL. We have a world ranked number 5 linguistic analyst who trains those US law enforcement agencies that I mentioned. So yeah, so really that's kind of where we're coming from. The linguistics point to an incoherent policy. It's not Charlotte, it's what's going on above her. They put her into bat on an unbelievably dodgy, bumpy wicket, right? Nothing makes sense. So that's, if I may, Andy, that's probably what I want to say. In terms of if there are any linguistics questions, I will do my best to answer. But within DDL, within Deception Detection Lab, we have a Chinese wall, and that is our process is to look at the words. So as our analysts are looking and analysing the words, I do not speak to them about the Mansion House speech or any other things because facts, hearsay, opinions pollute our outcome, pollute our report. So I don't get involved. So that's the way it works. It works cleanly and clearly. And as you can see, I think you can see the value of linguistics with some of these people. And I'm going to say government is where it sits naturally at the moment.
Fantastic. So, thank you very, very much indeed. You've given us a great deal of input over the last few days, particularly, of course, in relation to the report you so kindly wrote for TTF.
Pleasure.
We'll get to through the open letter. I've put a link to it in the chat. Sanal, please feel free to pop into the chat anything you'd like to, including a means by which people can get to you if they wish. Can we please appreciation once again to Sanal and its team? In a moment, we're going to be going to Maya
Thank you.
Jobs First, the organisation that creates Violation Tracker UK. I can see we've got a hand up from Charlie Ball. We'll come to questions and comments from others in due course. I'm also very pleased to say that we've been joined by Bambos Charalampus MP. Bambos, some of you will know this already, has been fighting for his constituents who have been treated very badly by financial institutions, particularly people owning businesses impacted by things like toxic interest rate hedging products. Hopefully, before Bambos leaves today, we'll provide an opportunity for Bambos to share his thoughts as well. Now, just before we go to Maya, I'm going to do something. I've never done this before, so hopefully it works. We'll never know. You've probably heard of BBC Verify. This is the BBC Verify page. It's an invitation to all of us to ask the BBC to take a look at something that we think ought to be assessed. So I'm about to send this. What I've written in the form is, as you can see, please investigate the statements made by the Financial Conduct Authority's Director of Consumers and Competition, Charlotte Clark, when she was interviewed by Paul Lewis on Moneybox on Saturday, 19th July. The conversation is of major public interest for many reasons, including what is explained in my open letter sent to the Treasury Select Committee today. Give me a typo in that. Please see here, link to the open letter. Thank you very much, and please keep up the great work. Details of 61, nearest city is Portsmouth. That's my phone number. That's my email address. I agree to the terms in use and I've read the privacy policy, and I'm about to press send. Wouldn't it be interesting if BBC were to actually assess those comments and statements made by Charlotte and see what they say? It'll be interesting, won't it? Also, I think Sunil is absolutely right. This is, as I've said earlier, nothing to do with Charlotte personally. It's the policy issues around it that we are interested in. Sunil, thank you very much indeed. We're going to hear for a few minutes from Maya, and then we're going to hear from Martin White, and then we're going to hear from JB Beckett, and then we'll open it up to others. If you do want to chip into the conversation, it would be very helpful to me if you pop your hand up digitally, as Charlie Ball from Charlie Ball TV has done. Thank you very much indeed. Maya, great to have you with us as always. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me, Andy. So I'm from Good Jobs First. We produce Violation Track UK, which I'm sure Andy has told you lots about. It's a free database or freely available database of corporate regulatory infringements in the UK. It's based on Violation Tracker in the US, which has been going since 2015. We really sweep everything into this tracker. So we have become something of experts in the field of regulatory enforcement, and I'll get onto that in a little while. Just my reflections based on our work on the Money Box piece and generally Rachel Reeves's Mansion House speech. So two major red flags from this retail investment policy for us. One which was picked up by Paul Lewis, and that is who is going to be giving this targeted support. So if you go into the details in the Leeds Reform documents, there are some very familiar faces. Topping the list is Barclays. Now, just the day after the Mansion House speech, Barclays was fined 42 million for failing to do proper checks on a company whose principal partner, John Dance, fraudulently transferred 64 million of clients' money to his own accounts. In total, Barclays has been fined 576 million since 2011 for corporate misconduct. Next, you've got NatWest, fourth most penalised company in the UK. It's accrued 704 million in penalties for regulatory breaches since 2010. Third was HSBC, fined 386 million since 2011. And fourth, Lloyds Banking Group, which has paid out 472.7 million. All four of these banks were heavily implicated in the PPI scandal, which is the biggest mis-selling scandal in UK history, in which aggressive sales tactics were used to mis-sell insurance to customers. So these groups, alongside some others who most of whom are on our tracker in some form, these are the firms that have been tasked to be the conduits of this policy. And then this brings me back to Charlotte Clark's response. So given the context, her responses to Paul Lewis's questions are very concerning. She didn't make any reference to any additional protections that would be in place. And given the track record of these companies, one would hope that there would be some kind of additional protection to make sure that consumers were not being missold products. The second red flag is the impact of this policy and the accompanying deregulation, which was promised simultaneously, in the context of the reality of regulatory enforcement. So we've got these big fines by banks, but generally regulation in the UK is very poor. And I always go back to the example of the HBOS fraud, where hundreds of small businesses were ruined. And this was a case which the FCA had refused to take. It later fined Lloyds after Thames Valley Police had prosecuted the case. But I always go back to that example because it is just such a good example of cases that the FCA do not take up. And the reality is that FCA has a huge remit, even bigger now. It has its growth duty and a huge caseload. And Reeves also in that speech attacked the FOS, Financial Ombudsman Service, for all its problems. It's one of the only spaces for consumers to seek redress. And lastly, I would highlight, and I appreciate Sunil's point about language here, because it seems quite striking to me that Reeves mentioned maintaining international regulatory standards, but the reality is that UK regulatory enforcement is lagging behind the US. We looked at this in a report last year which compared UK to US enforcement, but just to give you a snapshot, Barclays in the US, Barclays has been fined 7 times more than in the UK, NatWest 13 times more, HSBC 9 times more, and the list continues. So I'll leave it there. This will all be in a blog that we're going to publish later this week. So if you would like to see all those figures, please do sign up. I'll just put it in I'll just put the sign up form in the chat. It's only a monthly blog, a monthly newsletter where we talk about everything that's been added to the database that month and any insights that we've had from it. And do email me as well if you've got any questions, because I'm afraid I've got to run off and put my baby to bed. But please do email any questions. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much indeed. Round of applause for Maya and our colleagues at Good Jobs First, who make Violation Tracker UK, USA, and international too. Fantastic. Maya, please do populate the chat with any links that you would like to, including the reports you mentioned. Maya, we make reference to the piece of work you did with and for Unchecked, the report that came out last year, because it's such a good report explaining basically how weak our regulators enforce. And wasn't it fascinating yesterday, Maya, with Ofwat basically being abolished? One wonders if something similar is going to happen to any other regulators. Maya, thank you very much. But Bambos, we're going to hear from Martin White next. But Bambos, if you'd like to, please come in after Martin White, which will be in a few minutes' time. It'll be great, Bambos, to have you introduce yourself as a very active MP looking after your constituents very, very well indeed. Mr. Martin White, over to you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. A few minutes. Thank you.
Don't worry, Andy. I can keep to a few minutes. Well, first of all, thanks to everyone else who's spoken so far. I'm going to take a bit of a sideways look at today's immediate discussion. Like Sunil earlier, I think that the current proposals amount to an incoherent policy. So I'm going to take rather a sideways look in much of what I'm going to say. One of the things that concerns me most of all to do with the story, which is the growth agenda and the idea that financial services can somehow be boosted to create more growth. But is this necessarily what we would call good growth? Sadly, I don't think the current initiatives are overall helpful. Now, I'm not in any way going to contradict Andy's argument that the financial sector is predisposed to misbehave. I think the evidence is massive in support of his argument. But I also think that much of the thinking behind the government's current policies is too simplistic and is too much a case of giving the financial sector a wish list and to help city insiders to help themselves to even more of the nation's wealth, arguably contrary to the interest of ordinary people. Now, the word investment, like so many words, can have more than one meaning. The popular meaning is I'm investing by buying stocks and shares from other people. And what we have today is a little bit reminiscent of the Thatcher government's Tell Sid campaign. That tells our age perhaps a little bit, which was to support the privatization of a number of nationalized businesses. There is a subliminal message here of encouraging people to invest more in equities. Now, that's not necessarily entirely stupid at all, but the risks are perhaps being downplayed. To illustrate this, what will the national attitude be following this campaign if more people put a lot more money into the stock market, if we then have a big stock market crash in the next few years? Now, a stock market crash can happen at any time. You've got to face up to it. So if you're going to make investment in equities, it's absolutely vital to understand that asset prices may indeed fall a long way at some point, and to have the right understanding and emotional preparation to cope with this without simply panicking is vital. Stock market falls could be fantastic opportunities, but not everyone necessarily realizes that. Now, in the UK Shareholders Association, we're very much thinking how we can get better financial knowledge into the public domain. This isn't easy at all, as much of the formal media regards the financial sector as a customer. And of course, much social media activity is really about selling. But what about the other, arguably more important in the national context, meaning of the word investment? What really matters is decisions made across British businesses to deploy shareholders' money to maintain and develop their competitive advantage. To me, this is what stewardship should really about. But without this more long-term attitude, and that all this stuff was covered quite thoroughly in the K Review some years ago, without this attitude, we will ultimately lose more and more worthwhile businesses and jobs. I would argue that the incentives placed on companies by the financial sector tend towards underinvestment. I'm far from the only person saying this. So, back to what an intelligent national policy framework might look like. Now, the challenge for an intelligent investor is to identify and own for long periods companies that are going to be able to make good returns on capital over long periods. And we need lots of these companies to export successfully in order to pay our way in the world. But whilst decent return on capital is vital, so also is the productivity in terms of per hour worked, which is arguably a vital driver of ordinary people's economic well-being. We have to face up to it. International competition is so much tougher than it was, and it is now looking as if our businesses overall have been underinvesting. What I fear is that for our political leaders for decades, these questions have been in the too difficult bucket. We just don't seem to have leaders who want to tell us the uncomfortable facts and to lead a national debate about them. Whether this is more a lack of understanding or lack of courage, I just don't know. Now, there's some important work being done in this area of what's useful in the public interest in terms of investment and how to run business by an outfit called the Productivity Institute, which is supported by government. And they're going to have what looks like an interesting conference in Manchester on the 4th, 5th September. It's free to go, and I've got one of the places remaining. I'm sure there's still lots of places remaining. Some well-known and relevant commentators who have interesting ideas that I think are worth listening to include John Kay, of course, and also Andrew Smithers, both of whom might be very worthwhile guests for future Transparency Task Force events. And final thought, coming back to the current discussion, I have a nasty feeling that some of the drivers of policy originate in the Treasury, who seem to love more financial profits, more high financial service salaries and tax today at the expense of consumers. But the nasty trick is that many consumers won't find out until they come to retirement that they have lost so much in charges over the years. Lord Adair Turner has said that the order of magnitude of avoidable wealth extraction might typically be around 50%, which means the difference between suffering avoidable charges and not doing so could mean achieving half the pension that you otherwise would. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin Whiteley. Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much indeed, Martin. And Bambos, thank you for being with us. If you'd like to take a moment to introduce yourself, Bambos, and say whatever you'd like to about the FCA, about regulation, about the reforms underway, or anything else that you'd like to take the conversation to, for just a couple of minutes, perhaps, before we then go to our next speaker, JB Beckett. Mad Boss, thank you very much for having your time with us. Thank you, Bambos.
Thanks, Andy. And I'll be relatively brief. So obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about what Charlotte Clark said when she was on the Money Box interview. And I think you've gone over that. And Andy, thank you for sharing the letter with me that you sent to Meg Hillier, the chair of the Treasury Select Committee. And obviously the starting point has to be, we have to protect consumers. So people need to be protected from their investments. And obviously the government have got their growth agenda, but that needs to be clearly balanced out with the protections that investors, ordinary investors like me and others are doing, investing our money, because people invest for different reasons. Some people want to invest for long-term low growth, but the fact that it's secure. And what we don't see is the Wild West, where people are their investments, which is their life savings or their pension pot or whatever, is being invested in risky things under the guise of growth, because growth is the name of the game. Obviously, Emma Reynolds has said has been tasked with going away and coming back with some sort of policy later on in the year about this. But key to that policy are going to be the safeguards. So I will watch with bated breath. Maya she recalls some of the big failings that have happened with banks and other financial institutions over the past. And we just heard from Martin about the issues around growth policy as well. So I think we just need to be mindful of those. So, and I've got constituents that have had huge problems with banks and other financial institutions over fraud, over terrible misbehavior, and trying to get redress has proved incredibly hard for many of them. So, I'm going to wait and see what happens. I'd be interested in the response that Andy you get from your letter to Meg Hillier, and I will then see what the appropriate action is as a result of that. So there's still a few steps to come, but I do think the first thing that has to happen is investors need to be protected, and that we don't have the scandals that we've seen before. It is worrying if you relax regulation that enables all these things to happen. I'll leave it there because I know you have speakers. Thank you.
Boss, thank you very much. I think you're absolutely right, sir. I think that if we do protect consumers properly, then we'll have a sector that people can have trust and confidence in. If we have a sector people can have trust and confidence in, they'll invest in it. They'll put their money into it. There'll be no reason not to, because they'll know that if things work out great, and if they don't work out great, they will know that there's some kind of fair and sensible mechanism for them to get justice and compensation if they are appropriately entitled to it. And that will all stimulate growth. It's quite ironic, we think, Bambos, that the strategy to stimulate growth might actually be counterproductive, because there's a risk that it comes across as a bit of like desperation for growth. And if you do that, it just makes people naturally kind of clam up and feel nervous, anxious, cautious, the very opposite of what we want to happen. So what simple, straightforward regulation that is robustly enforced, and that way we get the power of the deterrent. At the moment, we understand that crime represents, forgive me, fraud in its various guises represents about 40% of all reported crime. And people think they can be fraudsters and not get caught. We've got to do a lot more to protect consumers, use the power of deterrent by enforcing robustly, and that means we need strong regulation. That doesn't mean we need lots of regulation. Nobody wants red tape, but we do want the system to work. Bambos, thank you very much indeed for being with us, and thank you for the superb work for your constituents, including some folks we know very, very well who've had their lives turned upside down. Bambos, thank you. And we're going to go to JB Beckett now. JB, please do take a moment to introduce yourself. JB, like others speaking today, has been a long-term supporter and active member of the TTF. Over to you, JB. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. The rear gunner or the curtain closer, I'll let you decide. I don't think who I am is particularly important. I've been a supporter, obviously, of the TTF for more than 10 years now, and an industry practitioner for the last 30. And Andy asked me just to ramble for 5 minutes or so. So please forgive me. I'm going to ramble on for 5 minutes. I will set out why time is everything when it comes to regulation. And I'm going to ask you to step into my time machine, Andy. It is September 15th, 2008. Lehman Brothers, the fourth largest investment bank in the US, founded in 1850, declares bankruptcy. What unfolded was unimaginable. The system broke, time stopped. It was the epicenter of the great financial crisis, one that spread from the US mortgage market to engulf the whole of Wall Street and the world. Many lost their jobs, their homes, their savings, their pensions. Some lost their lives. At the time, bankers' poor regulation coupled with complex financial innovation and risk-taking was blamed. At the time, we did not know if banking or even the financial system would survive. The notion of too big to fail or casino banking became common speak. Then, sometime around March 2009, the clock started again. In the aftermath, we were left in this highly reflective and protective regulatory state, led by increasing EU regulation. In firms too, culture suddenly became much more risk-averse, with more controls, more risk committees, more risk staff, more rules, and more reporting. That culture of catharsis continued in the UK and Europe for many years after, partly due to the European sovereign crisis and the recession hangover, but also the regulatory aims of the European Commission, which doubled down on protection. The US did not do the same, at least not at the same time and not in the same way. That de-risking of banks also moved capital and risk into asset management and alternative finance, creating a shadow banking sector and a universe of unregulated investing. System risk was not reduced, it simply changed. By 2015, the US was already well into recovery By 2017, Donald Trump began to liberalize US banking, and the acceleration of US exceptionalism began. As the dollars flowed out of the UK and Europe into the US, it capitalized the rise of big US tech stocks and US banks. Time then. 25 years have passed since the dot-com crash. Nearly 17 years have passed since Lehman Brothers. 15 years since the flash crash led by high-frequency traders. 14 years since the Euro sovereign crisis. 9 years since the Brexit referendum. And over 5 years since the start of the COVID pandemic. Time moves on. Governments come and go. Money flows. The industry grows. Tick following talk. With time, memory of risk fades. As time passes, fear subsides to greed, and we move from a collective perception of regulation as being needed for protection to one of bureaucracy, stifling competition and growth. That doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually with time. It is human behaviour. And it's hard to fully know the long-term effect Brexit will have on UK politics and deregulation. Andy, you'll recall you and I exchanged after the referendum that the UK had two choices ahead: follow the US into deregulation or gold plate its protections. What we saw was a fairly lethargic unwinding of EU rules, slowed by the pandemic, but since the deregulation clock is speeding up. Today, inside firms, the risk culture has changed from protection to embracing risk for better outcomes. Taking risk is no longer bad, but good. Competition in drives firms to take even more risk to compete for assets. This is also generational, as we have an entire working population who started working after the GFC 17 years ago. And so it seems timely to ask, what is the purpose of regulation? For this is fundamental to the current drive to deregulate Western economies, be that Trump's 401k executive order, to the DOGE stripping of US regulators, or the undermining of solvency controls in UK regulators by the current Treasury, to the reduction of customer protections like the Financial Ombudsman Scheme. In the simplest sense, regulation is primarily there to maintain a stable money system, restrict customers making bad decisions, and prevent bad actors exploiting the same customers. This assumes a few things. Firstly, customers have low financial acumen, that the financial system is inherently unstable if left unchecked. And lastly, that the industry cannot be trusted to self-regulate itself because it is inherently driven by self-interest. If these hold true, then we should recognise that time, when combined with political rotation, tends to perpetuate regulation cycles, a continual push and pull from left to right, all the while an ageing populace and a stagnating economy. Whilst then these cycles are inevitable, they can also be manipulated by the City and Wall Street. Note that regulation is not about eliminating risk. This will be contentious, but risk is integral to capitalism, and risk can grow money over time. The longer the time horizon, the more risk that can be endured. This is textbook stuff. However, risk not managed or poorly timed or poorly matched can lead to critical failure, and protections are needed. Even when well managed, there's a degree of uncertainty with risk. Hence, our concern when protection is reduced in favour of industry protectionism, as the Chancellor goes cap in hand to the City in search of capital to finance those Mansion Accord ambitions, and just as Trump supports Wall Street earnings and bolstering the US stock market, we have concerns about the protections that are being given up. To conclude, I firmly believe no matter which party had won the last general election, eventually the same deregulation strategy would manifest. Sunak's competition blueprint, future regulatory framework, morphed into Reeve's growth leads reforms. The ideology might sound different. The outcome looks very similar. Less regulation, less compliance costs, more industry profit. Time then is everything to regulation, and the clock is ticking. Thank you.
Wow, JB, that's superb. A superb piece of work. We would love to have that in written form, JB. We could include it, for example, as a letter to the editor in this week's Transparency Times. Please do supply it, pop it across, and we'll include it. JB, there's a lot of thought went into that. I love the way that you frame the issue of consumer protection versus industry protectionism. There was a bit in what Charlotte Clark said where she talked about not just wanting to support the industry, also wanting to support consumers. There's a really interesting dynamic there. JP, thank you very much indeed. Okay, we're going to spend the next 15, 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes or so getting input from various folks. Charlie Ball, please do turn your camera on if you can. Whether you can or you can't, please do unmute so you can make your point, Charlie. Then we'll go to Ian Duffield. Could I please invite who's about to be speaking in the last part of the session to be as short and sweet and as succinct as possible so we have a chance to get around to as many people to make a point. Thank you. We're going to go to Charlie Boyle.
Thanks. Sorry, I can't turn the camera on, Andy. I'm trying to do multiple things on one device. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good. So I'm going to zone out a little bit. For those of you that don't know my background, so I was a Barclays whistleblower, tax consultant, accountant, and I've worked in all sorts of different corporate environments, and I understand politics as well. I think it's very important to recognize that this government does not have a growth agenda at all. What they have is an OBR agenda. So the OBR stands for the Office of Budgetary Recession, as I like to call it. And they're looking for the OBR to give the green light to say that they're going to have growth in the future. So they're not really looking 4 years ahead. They're looking 3-6 months ahead until the next OBR forecast. That's a massive problem because it's the wrong motivation. So all these announcements about growth and reducing red tape, if I was skeptical, I might think that they're not actually going to happen or they're going to be watered down, because we've seen a lot of things from this government that have already been watered down in the last year. Countless examples. The other thing I wanted to mention is that even if deregulation goes ahead, so I've got a TikTok account with 2 million views last week alone. And the reason I'm telling you that is I see so many comments about literally zero trust in not just government, but any regulatory agency, the justice system. You know, there's pretty much zero trust in any organizations. Now, I've never seen anything like it, and I see it in the comments in real time. So, you know, even if this deregulation goes ahead, I would suggest that it might not have much different, you know, might not make that much difference, because people are already very skeptical of most financial products. If they really wanted to sort out regulation, they should be looking on social media, because people are getting ripped off right, left, and center, and lots of things without any context. We've also got a pensions time bomb in the UK, you know, predicting 300% debt to GDP within our lifetimes. That's something that maybe they should be promoting, you know, encouraging people to pay straight into a pension before tax, so that money is truly locked away into funds. So they can't use the excuse of, well, I don't know what I'm doing, because it's going straight into a fund. So that's the way it should work. So yeah, just my thoughts on the subject of the actual BBC clips. I thought it was actually Rachel Reeves speaking in the beginning, just because of the way she was coming across. You know, one particular sentence stuck out. I think she said at one point, "Will attract larger return over a longer period." So that's definitely misleading, to say the least. That's all, Andy. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. It was that line, Charlie. It was that line that caused me the greatest concern, because I joined financial services in August 1986 as a trainee financial advisor, pre-regulation. Then we had Loutro and the attempt to move the industry from the Wild West to a proper civilized, professionalized industry. And we had it pumped into us for, you know, years after years after years. And we have to train our consultants in the same way. You do not make inaccurate statements to clients about future returns. You do not say that equities and private markets will outperform safe alternatives, because that statement is fundamentally wrong. We build our entire open letter on the point that it is dangerous, the impression that X will outperform Y. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen. And
Well, not only that, Andy, sorry, just very quickly, the context that's missing here is that we've had historic asset price bubbles over the last 15 years. That's the bit that's missing in her answer.
Yeah, and that point about the bubbles is really worrying. What if What if the government strategy does work and we do have people putting money from deposits into equities that does cause a bubble, and then for one reason or another, the bubble that the government's helped to create then bursts? I mean, we're just compounding problems on top of problems. There are so many talking points here, but fundamentally, Charlie, I think you're in agreement with us. We had a choice. Do we do nothing and just listen to the programme and say, well, it's wrong, but we're not going to do anything? Or do we try to wave a big red flag? And boy, oh boy, we're trying to wave a big red flag, and thank you for helping us do that. Thank you very, very much. We're going to go to Mr. Ian next. Ian, please, the short version we need, and then we'll go to Nigel Cairns. Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm coming through okay, Andy?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Yeah. I've done this as bullet points to try and make it as quick as possible. I've just got half a dozen of them. It's a little bit of what Sunderland's talked about, what he and his company do. So I listened to the recording earlier this afternoon and just made a few points. It mentions targeted support, and specifically she states consumer protection at the heart of it. That's a bit bizarre given this whole thing is about the reduction of consumer protection. And it's not at the heart of it, it's actually growth. So to me, that's a simple lie. There's little mention of risk appetite. So she only mentions it once. And she also suggests that they're moving away from the way advice has been given in the past. But one of the things that in the past advice has concentrated on is trying to understand a customer's risk appetite. And if they say that they're moving away from that, or suggest that they may move away from that, and they may look at what a product will do well for a customer without actually understanding that customer's appetite for risk, then that's going to be a bad thing. She specifically said, you can never look to the future and state that you will get a better return. And then she immediately says completely the opposite. That's just a lie. End of. There's no umming and ahhing about that. She actually contradicts herself within the space of a couple of minutes. She says there's a difference between volatility and risk. That's complete nonsense. Volatility is by definition a risk. They're one and the same thing. So she clearly, I won't say she doesn't understand what she's talking about. It's waffle, and you know it's a nonsense. They talk about retaining vital consumer protection. She said that, but then how does that explain the FCA restricting access to the Financial Services Compensation Scheme in the Woodford situation and others? And how does it explain what we've seen on the violation tracker? You know, that's about consumer protection. The violation tracker says these organisations just keep failing and acting badly time after time after time. And the last one, very quickly, is the government hype has been mentioning very strongly or setting the expectation that this will provide money for UK startups, right? But look what happened when Woodford, who arguably was fated as one of the best fund managers ever, look what happened when he did exactly that with the Woodford Equity Income Fund, right? And what's more, then look at how the FCA actually dealt or failed to deal with that, and dealt with the fallout by screwing retail investors and consumers by their false narrative about the 77p in the pound. And Sunderland was absolutely right. My wife got 7p in the pound back. But what they did is manipulated the figures to make it look like the distributions that were done earlier on, which was simply our return of our own money, wasn't part of the compensation package. And all we got was 7p, not 77p. And that's my observations, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Very, very much indeed. We're going to go straight to Nigel Cairns, and then we're going to check for any other business. Then we'll wrap up today's conversation. Nigel, back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, given the opportunity, I will raise a few matters, if I may. In stark contrast to Sunil, when he introduced himself as having, I think, 30, 40 years of financial services experience. I have zero, other than my own dispute that's been running in quite a number of years now with HSBC and some involvement in with TTF. So I'm certainly no expert. Now, the first point I'd like to raise a lot more points, but we haven't got time to do that now, so I'll keep it to a minimum. The first point that hasn't been raised at all is that there's going to be a consultation. All these points that we've discussed today will have to be very carefully thought about and written up in the formal consultation to the FCA that's coming up. Yeah, I'd hope to be able to have a chance to contribute to that. The next point is that the FCA clearly, in the way that was portrayed by Charlotte Clark, are portraying themselves as the consumer champions. Now, there was a point that Paul Lewis pressed her on, and that was the to do with the responsibility for consumers relative to its other responsibilities. And quite honestly, Charlotte Clark was misrepresenting and mischaracterization and showing mischaracterization of the FCA's position on consumer protection. She very clearly said that consumer protection is the FCA's primary objective. Now, that is just a straightforward mischaracterization or lie, whatever you want to use to characterize, but it's a very, very important thing to say and to get wrong. It's quite clear if you look at the FSMA that there's a hierarchy, and the strategic objective for the FCA is to make sure that the markets work well. And in support of that, there are three operational objectives, one of which is the consumer objective. And it's subservient to the primary objective of making sure the markets work well. And I think that was seriously misrepresented in what Charlotte Clark said on the Money Box programme. And I don't think it's Charlotte Clark that should be brought to task in any way whatsoever. But what she did say is the responsibility of Nikhil Rafi and Ashley Alder, the CEO and chairman of the FCA, and they should answer for what she said. They shouldn't hide behind a spokesman. They have to take full responsibility for what was said on that programme, because it was a programme. The FCA is a public body, and things were said on a public broadcaster to the general public, and so it's of the utmost importance that whatever is said is completely accurate, and it wasn't even inaccurate; it was a misrepresentation. So I think it's entirely wrong that the FCA should be masquerading as the champion of the consumer when clearly it's not. And I think that's the start point that should be corrected in the perception of the FCA by the general public.
Nigel, I think.
Sorry.
I was going to compliment you on putting your point across so clearly and so powerfully, Nigel. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, well, there were a few other points that I won't go on about now because I don't think we've got time. But very importantly, the misrepresentation of the position that will ensue after the 8% FOSS interest rate is taken away and substituted for 1% above base. And there were basically lies told about how that would impact on the consumer as well. But I'll leave it just there for now then, let others speak.
Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. Great input, sir. Thank you very much. And I see that Alla Kobliakova, I love saying your name, Alla, your surname. has kindly volunteered to help with the consultation as well. Ella, having your academic input to an exercise like that will be really appreciated. Thank you very, very, very much indeed for that, Ella. Thank you, Nigel. We've got time for any other business. Please wave your hand at me or something else if you'd like to chip in through the final part of our conversation. Put your hand up digitally or otherwise. And I think it looks like we're good. Oh, Mr. Mark Bannister. I had a feeling Mark might pop up with something. Mark, over to you. Keep it short and sweet for me. Thanks, Mark. Thank you.
Very short, very sweet. A little bit of knowledge about financial markets because I used to do it. Risk measures how much something moves, all right, and whether it's a permanent move. Volatility measures the speed of movement. They are distinctly different. Don't confuse the two, because if you do, you'll expose yourself as not knowing too much about it, and that won't be a good look. And I don't mean to be offensive in making that point, but the broader point in all of this is we must be completely accurate to unpick these boys and girls. It's perfectly doable, but we absolutely have to be on our A game to make sure that we succeed. Because the one thing that is critical here is that we cannot have a situation where the government are doing things that are expedient to them, but the absolute antithesis of that to all of you. That's it.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. That was the sweetest and the shortest you've ever been. Much appreciated. Powerful points. Seamus May is going to. I'm about to put a link to a TED talk, quite possibly one of the best TED talks I've ever listened to. It's a TED talk that Seamus spoke on. The title is Ireland, a Democracy or Corpocracy, and it speaks to so many of the very important we often find ourselves discussing in TTF land. Seamus, over to you. Thank you.
I just take 1 minute of your time. A lot of these people I'm hearing for the first time. It's been fantastic contributions from everyone. I live in a country much smaller than the UK. We've only got 5 million here in Ireland, and I have been involved in tackling corruption for over 40 years, actually nearly 50. And, you know, I have seen Ireland going from a democracy with a capitalist system, so capitalist democracy, to what we now have is a corpocracy. And I have absolutely no doubt, but legal corruption, when a country matures, it doesn't have to be like Nigeria in places with brown paper bags and huge amounts of money. The legal corruption is much more damaging and much more corrosive. And I have had extensive dealings with 2 of the 3 big regulators in Ireland, the Competition Authority and the Company Law Enforcement Office. And these guys, and I just put a comment up there, but these guys are part of a protection racket. And unfortunately, the courts are too. There's a very elaborate protection racket consisting of so-called regulators, even the Gardaí, which is the police force. They're all in it. And, you know, what you see that Lady Clark saying, like, she's got a job to do, she's got money to earn, she's got mortgage, whatever else. They're all the same, but they're actually captured by the system. And that's why we're all finding it so difficult to make any progress. But I'm not taking anything away from TTF. Absolutely brilliant organization. So that's all I have to say.
You're very kind, Seamus, for your work. I'm going to try to find a document I put together recently using ChatGPT about state failure in the services sector. I'll try to find that quickly while we are talking. Does anybody else want to come in with anything else before we do wrap up today's conversation? In which case, let me show you the document I'm about to put in the chat. I'm just trying to open it up now. I'll spend a few minutes on this. I don't want to rush it because it's actually quite significant in some ways. So let me share my screen. Of course, if you need to go now, folks, then just pop off. If you're happy to spend a few more minutes with me, please do so. What is state failure and how can it manifest in relation to financial services regulation? ChatGPT said, state failure, in general, refers to the breakdown of a government's capacity or willingness to carry out its core functions. When applied to financial services regulation, state failure manifests not through complete collapse, but through systemic regulatory failure, institutional capture or neglect that allows widespread misconduct, injustice, or risk to flourish unchecked. State failure in financial services regulation occurs when the state is unable or unwilling to enforce financial laws and regulations effectively, protect consumers and investors from harm, hold powerful financial actors accountable, maintain trust, transparency, and integrity in financial markets, prevent systemic risk to the broader economy. Rather than full collapse, this is often a partial or sector-specific failure, a failure within the state, not necessarily of the state. How can it manifest? Here are several concrete ways state failure can show up in financial regulation. Number one, regulatory capture. When regulators act in the interest of the financial institutions, they are supposed to oversee rather than in the public interest. This undermines fairness and accountability. Example, senior executives from banks moving in and out of regulatory roles, creating conflicts of interest. Two, ineffective enforcement. When financial misconduct, for example, fraud, mis-selling, money laundering, is not properly investigated or punished, creating a culture of impunity. Example, weak response to major banking scandals despite clear evidence of wrongdoing. Regulatory arbitrage or loopholes, allowing firms to exploit legal grey areas or operate in lightly regulated environments, increasing systemic risk. Example, light touch regulation contributing to the 2008 financial crisis. Failure to protect consumers. I'm going to read this bit out loudly. When regulators fail to prevent or respond to consumer harm, including scams, mis-selling, or unfair contract terms. Example, victims of financial scams or collapsed investment schemes left without redress. 5. Over-politicization or deregulation pressure. Interesting, folks, eh? Governments weaken regulatory frameworks under pressure from industry or for ideological reasons, compromising oversight. Example, lobbying to roll back accountability regimes like the senior managers and certification regime. 6. Institutional inertia or under-resourcing. Regulators may be too slow, risk-averse, or underfunded to act decisively, particularly when dealing with large institutions. Example, regulators ignoring whistleblowers or failing to investigate large firms due to resource constraints. Consequences of state failure in financial regulation. Loss of public trust in the financial system. Repeated financial scandals and crises. Erosion of democratic accountability. Economic harm to consumers and small businesses. Increased inequality and social unrest. Addressing it. To prevent or correct such failure, a state must ensure regulatory independence and adequate funding. Those words, folks, those 3 words, ensure regulatory independence, is where we're at right now. What we are seeing, I believe, is the Financial Conduct Authority losing, or perhaps has already completely lost, its regulatory independence. The moment somebody at the FCA thought it's okay for the FCA to take on a growth and competitiveness agenda, that was the beginning of the end of the regulatory independence of the FCA. Because regardless of how many attempts you make to manage the conflicts you've created for yourself, it is just a matter of time before the defense mechanisms break under pressure. That is exactly what we are seeing right now. Strengthen enforcement and accountability mechanisms, promote transparency and whistleblower protection, empower civil society, media, and parliamentary scrutiny. Our letter to the Treasury Committee today is quite literally a request for greater parliamentary scrutiny and reform government structures to resist capture. Folks, that's what this battle is all about. The battle lines are drawn. We will not go quietly. We will not shut up. We will keep pointing to the evidence. The evidence is out there. The evidence is clear. It manifests in all kinds of forms, including folks like Charlotte Clark going on money having to try to defend policies that so many people don't stack up. Charlotte, I don't know what was going through your mind whilst you were being interviewed, but I would not be surprised if you feel a little bit unconvinced by some of the policies you are to promote. Let me put it that way. Folks, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Great to have you with us. Let's carry on working together, trying to do what we can to support consumer interests, because if we don't, who else is going to? Thank you all very much. Good night, and thank you to all the speakers. Thanks to everybody who helped with the report, particularly Sunil and his colleagues at Deception Detection Lab Limited. Cheers, folks. Good night. Good night. Thank you. Good night.